friends, my name is Marinés and today I've got a book haul for you. For those of you who are a little bit newer to my channel, here are my basic book buying rules. Number 1, if I want to read something, I will get it for free at the public library. Number 2, if I can't get it at the library, I will buy it on my Kindle. Number 3, if I love it, I will buy a copy for my physical library. Number 4, I occasionally break all of these rules. That said, my book buying habits are such that monthly hauls don't really make sense for me. I did my first book haul at the end of March and I decided to do these quarterly. So all of these are the books that I obtain in April, May, and June. First up, I ordered some things on Book Outlet. Before I Fall by Lauren Oliver. I recently named this in the top 5 books I finished in one sitting. In this book, a popular girl is reliving the last day of her life over and over again, and we relive it with her until she figures out why she's stuck in this loop. I originally read this in December of 2011 and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I've been really curious to see if I reread it if that opinion will hold, but for now, I'm just happy to own a physical copy of this for my library. Next, Eleanor in Park by Rainbow Rowell. This is the first book I read by Rainbow Rowell and I read it in June of 2013. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars and found it to be a really emotionally gripping read. I didn't have a high school love in this way, but there was a lot here about insecurity and sticking out and being an oddball in your family that I found incredibly relatable. The beginning of it was admittedly a little bit rough because the point of view switched so quickly that it was hard to get attached to one voice or the other, but it settled very nicely and I found this a really great read. Next, Landline, also by Rainbow Rowell. I've seen a lot of reviews where people didn't enjoy this quite as much as her other books, but I really liked it. Fangirl is probably my least favorite though, which I suspect is an unpopular opinion. I've given all of Rainbow's books 4 stars, but Fangirl just had less of an impact on me. Anyway, this book was a wonderful portrait of characters figuring out if love is enough. In this book, a woman struggling with her marriage finds a way to communicate with her husband in the past. Next, I have The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, and here's a book that breaks my book buying rules because I've never read this one. However, love it or hate it, I really want to fill out my C.S. Lewis collection, so I got this on Book Outlet because it was very affordable. I have a couple of his books that I have read and really beat up copies of the Chronicles of Narnia that I eventually have to also replace, and then I'll just keep that beat up collection for when I actually want to read and revisit. Everything else on this list is stuff I just bought from Amazon from my book budget because it's stuff I wanted to own. First up is The Little Prince by that guy. I practice saying it and everything, but I just don't want to embarrass myself. I bought this in a gift set, so it also came like with a CD of something and maybe like an illustration book. It's really cool to think that this is something that my hypothetical future children will one day also enjoy. Next, I now own physical copies of the Chaos Walking trilogy. I confessed once upon a time that while I talk about these a lot, I actually have not finished the series. I got some way into Monsters of Men and it was stressing me out so much I had to put it aside. Todd and Viola are some of my favorite characters in literature, so there's something in me that's really dreading watching this end. I know that I have to finish it, but it'll probably only happen after a reread. I'm usually a fan of hardcover books, especially for my library, but I just really love these paperback covers and especially the spines. The Chaos Walking trilogy takes place on a world that is populated solely by men who can all hear each other's thoughts. At the onset of the first book, The Knife of Never Letting Go, our main character Todd discovers a bit of silence and a secret so life-changing that he has to run for his life. Next up is Blackjack Volume 1, and here's another exception to the rule because with comics and graphic novels and mangas, I like to have the physical copies. I can read them on my Kindle, but there's just something about enjoying the art in person, so usually those I will get from the library if I can, and if not, I'll just buy them. I saw this on a list of recommended mangas for total noobs. I haven't read it yet, but it's about a talented surgeon who practices underground and in secret. Next up, I have Miss Marvel, Volume 1, No Normal, and Volume 2, Generation Y. I have read Volume 1, which I talked a little bit about in my May wrap-up. My favorite part was definitely just looking at Kamala's life as a first-generation American and her family life and how that set the background for her newly acquired superpowers. It got me interested enough that I bought Volume 2, which I haven't read yet, but I will read soon, you know, like all of the books that I'm gonna read soon. Next up is The Lover's Dictionary by David Levithan. I read this in 2011 and gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It's a story of a relationship told through dictionary entries, so it's told out of sequential order. We get to see all of the moments that make and break this relationship, from the small to the big, and Levithan has such a way with words that I found it incredibly wonderful and very impacting. Next, I have This One Summer by Jillian and Mariko Tamaki. I've had this one sitting here for a little bit, but I wanted to be all cool and read it during summer. Can you guys handle how cool I am right now? Next I have Women in Front of Sun by Judith Ortiz Cofer. This was our Latino lit pick for May, so I talked about this a little bit in my May wrap-up. This is a collection of essays and poems and short stories by Cofer detailing her journey to becoming a writer. It's a really short and easy read, and as I mentioned before, I want to keep it with my other books that I keep on the subject of creativity and writing. Next, I bought the Secret Garden coloring book, and Amazon finally gave it to me. Everyone just made it look like so much fun, so even though I didn't really know where I was going to find the time to color, I bought it because I'll never have time to color if I don't own a coloring book. Duh. I'm loving it so far, all of the illustrations and just how tiny and delicate and intricate it is. Here's all I've gotten done so far. Next, Stardust by Neil Gaiman. I am not a huge fan of Gaiman covers, but I found this in, again, a gift edition, and I loved how cute and simple it was, and the material of the front cover. Stardust was the first Gaiman book that I read at the end of last year. I loved the movie first, so I found this a wee bit underwhelming, but I liked it enough that I still wanted my own copy, especially to keep adding on to my Gaiman collection. I do own the Graveyard book and the accompanying graphic novels, and The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. I read this in June, so it's in my June wrap-up, but I also talked about it in that video where I talked about things that kind of sink into your feelings more and more with time. Flippin' loved it, so much so that I'd be hard-pressed to tell you if this is my favorite or the Graveyard book, but probably I have to read the Graveyard book again, and then probably I'll have to read this one again. Being a rereader is so much fun. This book crept all up in my feelings after I read it, and it is the story of a man who comes home for a funeral we don't really get to hear about. We just know that he's recently come back home, and he ends up at this house at the end of the lane. As he sits there, memories of an adventure he had as a boy come flooding back to him, and we go on this adventure with him as he remembers it. And also Coraline. I thought this was good, but also probably my least favorite of Gaiman books I've read so far, but I gave this 4 stars, so least favorite is comparative. Next, we have The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, but I really loved it, even though there were places where it kind of dragged on in the storytelling. I just loved that story so much that I knew that I wanted to own a copy. It is a story of a boy who gets to visit like a fairy tale land where not all is as it seems. Things are kind of falling apart, and he gets wrapped up into the adventure there because he is trying to find a way home. I just loved it to pieces. I loved all of the fairy tale elements, and I loved the main character as well. Like I said, the storytelling can kind of drag a little bit throughout, which is why I had to do 4 out of 5 stars, but I really enjoyed this. And finally, I have The Highest Tide by Jim Lynch. I read this book in January of 2012. In my review of this book, I wrote that I loved it in that way, meaning that I'd be hesitant to recommend it to others because I'm not sure how they would find it. For me, this coming-of-age story set up against the backdrop of the Puget Sound was so rich and heartwarming. The Puget Sound almost becomes a character in this book. I visited Seattle in 2012 and we went to an aquarium there. Every mention of the Puget Sound seriously made me squee and reminded me of this book. My best friend probably thought I was crazy because all I could really tell her was, I read about this! Those are all of the books that I acquired in the last 3 months. I'm trying to hold on to all of my book buying budget over the next 3 months because I have fallen in love with this incredibly expensive edition of His Dark Materials. But I love it, and I want it, and I dream about it, and my shelves need it. Stay tuned until next time to see if I present you with another 15 books or only 3. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. These are some of the books that I bought this quarter, but I can't hold them all up, so how do I feel about you, lipstick? Excuse me.